Can everyone?
No, we can't.
Can everyone hear me like this?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Dear panel, dear audience, our case in opening government is simple. We don't think you have any fundamental right to rebel. Even if you would have that, we think it completely falls away on both utilitarian and right grounds to people suffering, to people not living a life that a dignified human should live. That's our case. We're going to prove to 2 points. Firstly, why you acquiring wealth inherently means you deprive others of that wealth. Secondly, why you think that's a bad thing. This is really annoying. Sorry, I'm going to put it down.
Yes.
Turn it off.
Okay, so, sorry. Okay. 4 points like model, definition, that kind of things. Firstly, what are basic needs? We're going to be tough. We're going to say it's the UN minimum standard of living. It depends on the country. We think that's perfectly fine. We know it's a tough standard. We are completely happy by it. Secondly, this is a moral motion, right? You think every money above your direct human needs should be redistributed to anyway. We think it's perfectly fine to give it to the state, who's then going to redistribute it. We think it's perfectly fine to just give it away yourself. We think it's perfectly fine to give a charity or a state charity. We don't care about that, as long as it gets back to society and more fundamentally to the people who need it, up to the model. Thirdly, this is physically not a practical motion. Even though I'm from Nijmegen, I don't think it would work practically. We're going to say that you have this moral duty. We think that's the most important thing. Fourthly, we are more than happy with you keeping contributing to society, either to labor, to volunteer work, or to any other way. I think it's immoral to then demand a return from that in the form of money or other kind of resources. Is that clear? Awesome. Cool. So 2 points in the rest of my speech. Firstly, why you are acquiring wealth inherently means you deprive others not of wealth. Couple of steps here. First thing, now that money is not an intrinsic thing. At the moment you would switch to Bitcoin tomorrow, maybe it is for you, Michael, but for the rest of us, at the moment if we would switch to Bitcoin tomorrow, we don't think our euros would have any value whatsoever. I think this in general applies for money. Use your money to buy resources, either natural resources, either human resources. That's what you care about, that's the only thing that gives money value. Secondly, there's a limited amount of resources in this world. Limited amount of human capital, but more importantly, a limited amount of natural capital. Precisely the kind of resources that are needed by people who don't have the basic standards for living are extremely scarce. We're thinking of water, we are thinking of basic kinds of food, especially in certain parts of the world, they are extremely scarce. But even if they're not extremely scarce, they're still limited, right? No thanks. Thirdly, what is then what you follow from that? For every resource I have, that's a resource Ivo doesn't have, and that's a resource the rest of the world doesn't have as well, right? Resources are inherently exclusionary. It means you're the only one having them, the rest of the world doesn't have them, right? That's clear. What does that mean? It means you inherently deprive others of resources at the moment you start having them. Yes?
Given that people don't start on a level playing field, but a playing field that's full of hills where some people have lots of economic capital and some people don't, and that wealth acquisition is the only way that people at the bottom end of that capital can ascend to the top and close inequality, why is it always inherently immoral for somebody who's from a deprived background to gain wealth?
Okay, a couple of things. Firstly, note explicitly it's not the only way. You think other means of redistribution actually means you get from the top to the bottom. Secondly, note that under our model there would no longer be such thing as a, well, not model, but ideally there would be no such thing as a top, given the fact that everyone is going to level down. Thirdly, we think specifically those people, and we see this empirically happening, if you know what it's like to live a life with poverty, then you're willing to redistribute it. We see this in many, many cases happening, because you know how important it is in suffering. Fourthly, I am willing to trade this Google away, how much you adore it. So, why is it then a bad thing? And here's where it gets complicated. So the first thing, I'm just going to say, you have no right to wealth whatsoever. I'm going to prove that. Why? We think determinism is true. Sorry. We think every decision you make is created by either genetic or social factors. The fact that Ivo is smarter than me and will be a better lawyer means he will make more money than I do. We don't think there's like anything we have differed or we've changed it as well. Nothing. We think social backgrounds, the same apply for, so anything inherently is arbitrary. We don't think anyone is going to invest that. Why is this important? We think it means you have no intrinsic relation with a specific resource. Because for that intrinsic relation to happen, you should have something special. You should have actually have done something, you should have preserved it in that sense. If it came to you by sheer luck, because you're smart, or for genetic reasons, etc., etc., we don't think you have that relation, you don't think you have deserved it in that sense, so that means you don't have any right to it whatsoever. What does it mean? It means we can't use the metric of you deserve it, or you worked for it, or that kind of things, given the fact that it's purely arbitrary. Even if they're going to prove it will, and I'm curious to see that proof, I think it falls completely away to the other motion I'm going to talk about, being the fundamentality of rights and utility. Yes?
Which is morally preferable? My giving away £10,000 to feed people, or my investing that, making some profit but also feeding many more people through innovating new ways to generate crops?
Firstly, no, that's not strictly problematic to our model, right? We just say we distribute it, and you just give it away. We need to make sure the rest of society benefits, right? So we're perfectly happy to do that. Secondly, we're perfectly happy with giving a fund that's going to invest it. We're happy with them doing it in a better way. Thirdly, know that that's like your best case scenario. It's probably not what's going to happen at the moment you have any moral duty whatsoever, because there apparently see not that many people are giving it away, right? What we are doing here is establishing a moral duty. How specifically the moral duty plays out in the real world and is built in is a topic for like a different kind of debate. It's in no way intended to a model that you should just waste in or spend it in the least effective way. So, 2 reasons why this is bad. Firstly, we believe this pyramid a fundamentality of rights. I think our right to education, I think that's less important than someone else's right to life. Why is this? I could do the abstract philosophical story. I'm going to do it easier. The mere fact that you're human means you deserve a right. Because we're all humans, we believe there are some things fundamental to us, something we should all acquire. It means even if you do horrible things, you still have these fundamental rights. Even if you pose a direct threat to society, you still have these rights. I think you deserve them simply because you're human. Now you have also other kinds of rights, like for example the right to education, but I think they are less important. Why? Well, the easy reason is that you need the basic rights in order to get the more abstract rights. I think it's a fair method, but also more in general, you need it to be human. We think it's possible to be human without an education. We don't think it's to be human when you're continuously possible to be human when you don't have the right to life, right? So I think this fair pyramid, it means we should prioritize the very, very basic rights. Even if we're proved there will be some more abstract or deeper rights that are not guaranteed on the outside of the house, we're completely willing to accept this. And now utility and consequences of happiness. So €1 to a really poor person probably means he can buy a bread which will save his life. €1 to a billionaire means he will pay like a part of his savings boat, right? I think that's the relevant comparative here. I think you get far more utility out of the bread, given the fact that it means you can keep on living and keep on having any utility whatsoever, right? At the moment you have more money, it gets relatively less important to you. The marginal increase is lower. Why is this important? We think utility is a good thing, right? I hope you're all going to agree on that. We think that means you have a duty to create a maximum amount of utility, or not necessarily duty, to do that, right? Given the fact that the property rights are not metric, we need to look at the fundamental of rights or utility. Even if they would be metric, we are perfectly happy to trade them off to these two metrics. We're very proud to propose.
Every time you say something, you're like, oh, that's just something to contrary, but then
Thank you for that speech. Your opening case for the opposition, I'd like to give the floor to Evelyn. Here you go.
If I speak like this, would you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Yes. That's way better.
Keep speaking like that.
I'm gonna keep speaking like this, okay? Madam Speaker, we're going to talk about several things. We're going to talk about why having enough money will provide you with incentive to work even more and therefore to make a pie bigger to redistribute, that we're talking about. And why the more money you have for yourself, the more resources you have to spend on others, and that's why it's going to alleviate human and animal suffering. But first of all, a bit of framing. So what we consider as being immoral is when you're benefiting for yourself without giving the benefit to other people or actually harming these other people. What we're going to prove on this side of the house and why acquiring more money that you need in order to survive is not harming any other people, but actually benefiting. Now, we heard the case from Rule that, there are people suffering and you're depriving others from this wealth. We disagree with it. We don't think that that's a zero-sum game. We don't think that by having more money and investing it in a factory and then hiring all the poor people that couldn't have taken a job before is actually a zero-sum game. We believe that you can get more money for yourself and for others at the same time. Then we heard some stuff about why determinism is true and why everything is arbitrary. We agree with geometry. We agree with utilitarianism. We believe that we're going to bring more utility to the world if people having more money. Then we also heard that people have rights. Well, we also agree with the fact that people have rights, and we believe that rich people, via giving people social benefits, which they contribute with their taxes, are giving people much more rights than distributing money which nobody actually has. Now actually to my own point. Now, why having enough money provides me with incentives? So first of all, most of our motivation is extrinsic. We want to be respected in the society, we want to live in a nicer house, we want to live in a really nice place. And that's why a lot of people actually go to work. For example, I really don't want to get the PhD in criminology, right? But I know that in field of criminology, I'm never going to get employed without a PhD. Therefore, I'll actually go and get my PhD in criminology, because otherwise I'm going to get unemployed. And the only reason for me to do so is because I really want the money. Because I really want a nice house, maybe a nice garden, maybe I want to buy a dog and, to pay my taxes for my dog. So most of the extrinsic motivation that comes around is that I want to live in a nice house and I want to afford more than just the basic needs. I wouldn't ever go and get PhD in criminology if I just know that the only thing I can, that everything like in my house, if I have more than I can basically afford, is already immoral. Therefore, we believe that by doing this, by saying that these things are immoral, okay, I'm doing it wrong. So people are working much harder trying to earn this money. And we believe that it's moral for them to do so, even for reaching much more money. Because these people are benefiting others. If I'm getting more education, I become much more education. Therefore, I have an incentive to actually invent something. For example, if I own a business, I want my business to be as profitable as possible. Therefore, I'm going to come up with all of the crazy ways in order to increase my profit as much as possible. That means that I have a lot of progress. So for example, I'm going to, as we already heard from a POI, I'm going to create new ways of crops production. Or I'm going to, for example, create brown rice, which is much more nutritious than the actual rice, because I want to win a Nobel Prize. Or for example, I'm going to work with some engineering or some biotechnology, because I want to get more money from this job. And we believe that it's okay for people to only be thinking in terms of I want more money and I want a nicer house if they're creating something bigger. So we believe that by the virtue of progress, so more things are getting created, more people are going to use. And moreover, it's just increasing the share for everyone. So the problem is, when you have a lot of progress, a lot of things are being created. A lot of people are getting drastically getting out of the poverty trap because they get much more education. For example, school is much more accessible to them, or other means of production are more accessible to them, or job is more accessible to them. So there are much more resources which are distributed amongst the people. And again, we're not against redistribution. We're not against of saying that acquiring so much health, that you have so much wealth, which is bigger than some kind of a state of Ethiopia, we think that it's okay to redistribute money. Yes.
Okay, we're perfectly happy with people contributing to society. Your burden is to explain that's legitimate to demand reward if that effectively means people are starving.
Yeah, I already told you. I think that it's moral for you to acquire wealth if it doesn't actively harm other people. I don't think that acquiring wealth is harming other people. In fact, what I've proven you, that a lot of people would be very much incentivized to go and find a cure for cancer only to get a nicer house. And we believe that that's a good thing, because a lot of people would be cured of cancer. Now my second point, why the more money you have for yourself, the more resources you have to spend on others. So if I only have enough money to keep myself alive, I don't really care for trying to save the world. I only have enough money for myself, I only have a roof over my head, I only have something better here, and I'm actually not really thinking about what other people are. For example, when I go into the shop and I have a free-range chicken and a non-free range chicken, I go for the cheaper one, because it's the only one I can afford. So when I have more money, I actually go to the shop and can buy a free-range chicken. Or for example, I can go and donate some money to the Red Cross. If I don't earn enough money, so if I don't earn too much money for me to spend, then I will never take this money and donate them to the Red Cross. Moreover, the more luxury goods I'm buying, the more people on the factory that produces luxury goods are employed to work in the factory for luxury goods. And therefore, all of these people can also go and get more money in order to live their lives. But I do agree with you that every cent going to these people is essential. And we believe that people open up businesses only for the sake of getting more money in order to invest in their own nicer house. It's a good thing, and we believe it's moral for them to do so because they're saving other people. Now, secondly, there is a social welfare net. So all of the social welfare net and all the money redistributed we get from taxation from wealthy people. And most of the money that we get are from really rich people. They acquire a lot of wealth, they have several houses, and they get taxed on everything. You get taxed on your house, you get taxed on your dog, you get taxed on your shoes, you get taxed on your shirt. You get taxed on everything. And all of this money are going to redistribution to poor people, and the poor people you're thinking about. Moreover, they go to distribution of building the houses, building the hospitals, building the rehabilitation centers. And we believe that it's massive benefit, which you're not going to have on your side of the house. Because If we say that acquiring more health is immoral, then we're saying the taxation of wealthy people could also not happen. Now the other point is you open up new businesses, as I already mentioned. You want to invest more in your money, in your house or whatever you want to do with your money. So probably you're going to come up with new ways to make money. So probably you're going to invest into businesses. So when you invest into businesses, you open up, for example, new sectors in Nigeria, or you open up new sectors in Ethiopia, then you're hiring even more people from those regions. So therefore, not only like saving money for yourself and just donating everything, you have much more money to donate as a result. Because when you open up these new businesses, when you have so much money that you cannot spend, there is much more money you can donate to others. And therefore, we believe that under your metric, we are much more moral side of the house, and for that reason, I'm very happy to oppose.
Thank you for that speech, Evelyn. We'd like to give the floor to Isa.
Dear panel, dear audience, on side proposition we wish that society would indeed be made and only be made with the morality of people and what we deem moral, and that would be the guideline of everything, right? We don't think that's true though, and we don't think the practical case from opening opposition is therefore relevant within this debate. Why? Because you say that yes, probably people will still only work the moment when they actually get money. That's a shame, that's them being immoral. We only have to prove that that is being immoral, and Rule's already done so. So, what am I going to do? I'm going to talk about why that's actually immoral, because what do we think that is morality? Why actually the framework of opening opposition falls within that. So that's nice. Then I'm going to talk once again about why we're specifically harming others the moment when you don't give away this money, and why that is so incredibly wrong to do. So, first of all, what do we think is moral, right? We think that everyone within the state, and Rule said so several times, and thank you, that everyone within the state has basically the moral duty to work as hard as they can and to contribute as much as they can to that state. Why? Because we think that eventually generates most utility within that state, most people within that state being happy, able to live and thrive and survive and do the fun things that we want people to do, right? We think how you do that is by A, working as hard as you can, generating as much utility as you can. That would be the moral thing to do, maybe not the thing that people want to do, but it would be moral. And B, then using all of those funds, all of that money, except for the very, very most basic needs for yourself, for others, to improve society in that way. So we think if you can get extra Nigerian princes and farms, I don't really know what that was about with companies, etc. Great, do that. That would be then the moral thing to do, because you would then increase that utility within that society. So we think that is also roughly the same as the metric opening opposition accepts. Namely, well, if you harm people, that's bad. We say you implicitly harm people the moment when you A, are not contributing as much as you could possibly do, but also, what Rule's already explained, the moment when you're using those funds, the moment when you're eating that hamburger, the moment when you're living in that house, other people can't live there, other people can't eat that, other people can't do those things. Do you think that's incredibly problematic, and therefore you're actually harming people? We win under their metric. Second half.
Given that the definition of a minimum standard of living is ultimately an arbitrary number picked by the UN, why is it morally different to be taking money from people earning 25 cents a day to get to $1.25, as opposed to past $1.25 a day going up to $2?
Okay, so that's the idea that Rule's already explained, but I'm going to do so again, because I don't believe anything else in my speech. So, what is that, right? So, we think, and Rule's explained this to you, that minimum standard is indeed quite arbitrary, but it represents quite a lot, right? Why was this standard chosen? Because that's the standard that you have those most basic rights to live within that society. We think that within the entirety of society, if everyone would be giving away their money, everyone would meet this standard. That would be awesome. We would love to do that. We could then have other money to do other things, right? But we think that when people don't meet that standard, and that means that they don't have a roof, right? That means that they don't have enough food, that means that they don't have enough clean water to actually live in, and to be able to quench their thirst, we think that's incredibly problematic. We think that minimum standard is therefore quite useful. If you guys want to go with a bigger standard for basic human needs, that's fine with us, right? That would still give us the side of the motion, but would you still agree with the idea that people would be immoral if they didn't meet that standard? No thank you. So, why do we think that those rights are so much more important than other rights, right? Why do we think it's more important that Wu can live than that I can have a second house? That sounds quite intuitive already, but we think that we should make it clear because apparently the opposition doesn't understand. We think that the moment when Wu doesn't have that, doesn't live, he can't do anything to do anything fun ever. That means that he can't live his life, that he can't experience any possibilities, and that he has far less utility within that life than I could ever have of that second house. I can still be perfectly happy in my first house, it's quite good, I still have a roof, I still have that food, but I would not be as, and that second house could then be used by Wu to also live in, right? So we see that the moment when this is indeed useful, we think that's really good. Why is that useful? Because resources are finite, right? Because the moment when I have a house, Wu implicitly does not have that space on the earth to be able to live in, to be able to thrive in. The moment when Michael has lots and lots of things to do, I can't do all of those things because I don't have those resources. The moment when Gigi goes to Bilthoven, I can't go to Bilthoven. I think all of those things are problematic. We think that everyone should have the right to be able to live. We think it's incredibly problematic to go to Bilthoven, the moment when there are also people on the streets, living on the streets, and having problems. Sorry for making this so personal. No. Okay. So, why is that specifically problematic? Because the arbitrariness of society, right? We think that people within society have, even though they have worked for it quite hard, not necessarily earned the abilities to be able to work for that quite hard, to be able to generate so much, and to be able to have the intrinsic motivation to work that hard, right? We think that the determinism rules already explained to you. We think that the moment when I really want to do something good with my life, or I want to generate lots of money with my life, so thank you, that is great, but that's not necessarily something that I could actually do something about. That means that the moment when, on that rationale alone, it is decided who lives and who dies, that's incredibly problematic. Because we don't want that arbitrariness, we want everyone to be able to live, and we want everyone to, in the end, have as much utility as possible. That's something that this plan provides. And if you don't really want to talk about all the practical implications, then A, that's not as relevant within this debate, and B, for example, the practical implications of when you would actually have this as a plan in the state or something, right? We think that the moment when you would have this as a plan, that would probably mean that, for example, in class systems, people would do better, right? Because people from the lowest have would not only have the basic needs, because then they'd have money for that, but they also wouldn't be hindered by richer people having all this extra money to be able to send their kids to Harvard, or to send their kids to really good other schools, or to have like lots of fun and make sure that you can do that and to oppress you more. So I think even in a practical way, we win this debate. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech, Ivo. We'd like to give the floor to your ear.
Yeah, definitely. Most of the rules are similar. Like very small kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're invited to
Like
You know, it's also calling like different assholes, right?
Thank you for the story. So, we think that in this debate, side propositions to meet the burden of explaining why the redistribution that already happened under the status quo is more immoral or unjust than their policy. We think that they haven't shown us that, and they are not able to show that because it is not the case. Because we think that actually having normal taxes, social welfare, and partial redistribution, like it already happens under the status quo, actually leads to all the benefits that you talk about people actually getting that extra euro, and it actually leads to a bigger pie and to more morality overall. So in my speech, I will have first one big point of rebuttal, and then I will basically talk about one major notion that is attached to the fact that people are able to work as much as they want and to earn as much as they want. They have to give back a little bit of that to society to make sure that everybody has the minimum standard of living in our society, but at the same time they are able to get more. And that is desert. We think that that is a notion of social justice, and it is a metric, it is the best metric we can find to distribute certain types of resources. We think that there is no other metric we can find in our society, and we think that it's extremely problematic to take it away. But first, some rebuttal. So, no thank you. You say that we need to prove that acquiring wealth and more wealth makes others starve, and that that's immoral. No, we don't think that that is the case. No thank you. We think that, for instance, when you're an entrepreneur and you invest your money, so you earn a lot, you have a lot, and you decide to invest even more into building a new company, for instance. We think that in that case, you're not taking with your money away from someone else. You're actually increasing the size of the pie for everybody overall, because you're actually creating more wealth for other people in your society as well. And even if not, even if, for instance, you're just earning money as, I don't know, like a lawyer or something, and you're just using the money for yourself, at the same time, we have higher taxes. The more you earn, the more we can tax you proportionally, which means that the social welfare we can actually use to help those people that are in more need than you is actually higher. We think that if you take that away, it's actually more immoral, actually less moral, because you have less money overall to actually give to people, because you take away those people that actually under the status quo are increasing the size of the pie and are actually using their own individual wealth to also give some wealth to others. We think that it's okay that there are differences, that it is okay that some people at the end of the day still have more than others if the ones that have less also have a little bit more than they would have if everybody was on the same scale. Evan has shown you why when you have those 100 euros, you take them, you keep them, and you invest them rather than giving them to the state and then having them back redistributed to everybody is better, because you actually increase wealth. Second.
So say I have a gun in my hand and I point it to you four guys in opposition to say, if you don't give me 100 euros, I'm going to shoot you dead. I get probably those 400 euros and I get more net benefit because you guys are in debt. Have I earned those 400 euros more?
No, of course not. That is not what we're talking about. And that actually leads to my second point, the point of desert. Obviously, if you earn your money through robbery or through, I don't know, like threatening people into giving you their money, you don't actually deserve that money. We're talking about people, for instance, like Evelyn was talking about, people that are actually working hard to get on money. And even if, like you say, determinism is true, even if there are influences and that people cannot defy their circumstances, which we do not completely agree with, even if, well, it is a better metric to use desert than any other thing we can come up with. Because any other metric that you can use to actually determine whether what you have is yours or not, and whether you're actually like entitled to it or not, is totally unfair, because it's totally subjective. But desert is the only one we can actually use. Unless, obviously, you're robbing someone, which is not what we're talking about. It's completely like straw in our case. And anyway, so first of all, I will talk to you about why taking up desert away from society is totally unjust. Why? Because desert is there, it's a notion that we have there because we let people strive and work and get what they deserve. Obviously, it is a comparative notion. Obviously, it's not an objective type of desert. We don't actually claim that you can establish any type of objective desert. It's not what we're here for. What we want to say, though, is that actually the type of desert we have right now in society is better than any other type. Because even if your circumstances help you get where you are, you actually have to work to get there. We think that in any case, it's better than just saying, look, because of your circumstances, we're going to arbitrarily decide that we're all equal. It doesn't matter what you do. You still have to give back everything, and everybody needs to just earn 20 euros a day. We think that actually that type of thing is totally unjust. It's actually not working. Why? Why do we need desert? Because it is a method that can be employed more or less objectively to judge people in what they do. And when are we judging people on deserve? Well, basically every single day for certain type of resources. We're not judging people on deserve to give them social welfare, like basic need, for instance. But we are judging them on deserve when we want to give them something else. For instance, when you have entrance exams, when you have tenders, anything like that. Even when a company wants to, for instance, start a new project, we're judged on how much that company deserves to get that project. Why is that so important? Because it's considered as a fair metric. And why is that? Well, because you do more, you show that you can do more in the future, and therefore you deserve more in that comparison, in that precise moment of time. There is no other way you can actually prove otherwise that someone deserves a little bit more than others. And we think that it's very important that some people get more in society than others because they can actually have the ability to increase the size of the pie. It ties into what Evelyn explained to you. It explains to you why it's actually extremely important that people are actually able to get more, to deserve more, and actually reach that what we have been striving for. So, yeah. So why is it such a big issue when you take away this notion of deserve, and what does it leave society with? Well, it leaves not only with entirely subjective metrics, but it also leaves with a society that actually doesn't feel, with people in society that actually don't feel like what they're striving for and what they want to do is actually of any worth. Because actually society is telling them, or like the UN is telling them, that even if they strive for something, even if they feel like they deserve that thing, because there's some deterministic thing, and because it's not because of them and it's because of other circumstances, they don't deserve it and they have to give it back. We think that that's inherently wrong and it will lead to people actually striving less for things. We think that it's bad because of what Evelyn brought up. So because this motion will actually decrease the overall welfare of society, and we think that that is more immoral than people having a little bit more than others. We think that having overall everybody less, it's way more immoral, and because you're actually taking away the only way that we can actually judge who deserves more in society, but for certain things, we think that it's immoral and we think that it's bad. Please oppose.
Notice that opening opposition said that people desire or want to have more money in order to do good things. What they haven't proven to you is why desire is moral. First part of my extension will be why morality necessarily is related to rational thinking and reasoning, and that is more important than desire, which therefore becomes immoral. I'm going to do that by proof that it's part of what makes people human, and therefore ontologically humans are moral beings. From that, I will build 3 rational frameworks from why it is the case that it is moral in order to give away all the money you might earn beyond the money you earn to sustain your basic needs. An egalitarian one, a contractarian one. I'm going to finish a utilitarian framework, opening government bottom. Before I do that, I have some responses that don't neatly fit into this. Firstly, to the extent that closing up extension might be about the fact that you need monetary income in impoverished people, you also get political power, etc. We're happy to also redistribute political power if such systems exist. We mentioned David van Reybrouck wrote a very interesting book about democracy and lotteries. We're quite happy to fit with those principles. It's the principal part of our case. We're focused on economic inequality right now. That's currently this debate. Notice secondly that when they talk about the fact that people might do better by giving money themselves directly, we're not very interested in the metric, right? What we say is, people, if they have the opportunity to earn more than saving their basic needs, they're allowed to earn more money. They're not allowed to keep it for themselves and indulge themselves. They need to give all of that money back in a way that benefits society. That means, possibly you're going to concede, but that means that in practice, because humans tend to be selfish beings, that might mean in practice if the policy is enacted, the world will be a less nice place. We do think, however, the moral world will be a world where people will do exactly that and follow that logical reasoning. Then look at the fact that I gave a POI about the gun. Look, they told you correctly, coercion is wrong. The thing is, part of what someone does when they say, I'm only willing to give you money if you give me money back, I'm only willing to give you money if you work for me as long as possible. That means you directly coerce them, because you could have given them that money otherwise, right? You could have given them money and said, look, voluntarily, if you want to work in a factory, feel free, go ahead. There's no obligation on you to do so. Therefore, you're directly coercing them. More than that, we understand that scarcity is a thing. The reason why scarcity exists on their side of the house war is because when people try to make a profit for themselves, they don't care about how much resources are commodified in the entire world. They just want enough resources to get for themselves to those that are spending. That means they never look at the kind of resources that are important, the kind of differential commodities that they no longer need in order to be enacted. That is why people are currently indulging mass amount of money in creating rich commodity crops like alfalfa crops, while currently many people die because there isn't enough grain on the world. That system doesn't provide the outcomes of satisfying everyone's basic needs because the incentive structure isn't worked in such a way that people only care about their way, which are often mutually exclusive in the types of commodity that can exist in this scarce world. So in that way, we also think they're false. Extension. Firstly, notice that what differentiates humans from animals is our capacity to reason apart from things that are based on our desire. I can move my desire away and base pure and rational framework. I can advance my own mind into your other mind and think logically about that. Doing so, I can logically come to a way where I can say this is a better world, advance from what my personal desire might be, but simply based on things like outcomes which don't take my own desire into account. The fact that you can do that means that that's exactly what makes you human, because that's the one thing we can differentiate from animals. That means that in order to be a human being, you have the capacity for moral, rational, independent reasoning. That means desire is something that not makes you human. We think that the fat cats in Wall Street are currently nothing more than dogs, and they don't have a moral reasoning beyond the fact that they just want to lick any street ball on the street. We don't think that's a moral reason. Why then, if that's the case, as moral reasoning, do we get the best benefits on our side of the house? Why is this the only moral framework? Let's look first at the contractarian framework. Notice that on the basic level, the contractarian framework tells you you have to give something back to society because society gave something for you. The logical argument, the one that Barack Obama uses when he says, well, we built some roads, you probably need to contribute a little bit. That argument goes a little bit further than that. At the moment, society in general creates a structure where you have every basic needs met. Why? Because society provides a safe space for you in which otherwise no economic activity would be possible, and otherwise your very life might be at stake. Why is that? Because indeed sometimes humans are selfish creatures. They might want to get the things that you have, and therefore might, for instance, try to take you away or diminish your livelihood. We think anarchy is inherently something that can be exploitative and dangerous and needs collective action in order to solve that. That means you owe the state all parts of your livelihood, because otherwise you quite likely would have died. That means in that way you owe everyone, the entire society, all your earned bounty-based livelihood, because otherwise your basic livelihood wouldn't even exist. Now mind you, that argument might be used to say, look, that means you also need to give away anything beyond your basic livelihood, right? We understand, therefore, you have to give some part of basic livelihood because it's a need for you in order to get more stuff that you can benefit society from. Notice that need is different from desire, and that need is something you absolutely must have on a rational basis, and you can rationalize that, whereas desire goes simply beyond that. Egalitarian framework. Notice that this is part of human dignity. We aren't much different, all of you. I'm also not much different from a person who lives in an African sweat hut or something like that. The thing is, it was luck that I had the capacity to have been born. It was luck that I was born here, but people apparently like my rational thinking and therefore allowed me to speak in this room. Probably if I was born in an African sweat hut, I probably wouldn't have made it that far. It was pure luck that society managed to give me more stuff. We understand on an egalitarian basis, because it was pure luck and not something inherently based about the human, we need to make sure that all humans are in some way created equally and maintain equality. That creates such much equality that you need an equality of outcome where everyone's basic needs are met and not much more beyond that, because otherwise people can use the more they have towards their advantage and therefore diminish the equality. Finally, on the egalitarian framework, notice to some extent it's correct that people might not be more happier with your villa. But I think that's a slightly odd way of putting it, because I can imagine Michael gets really, really happy when he gets his first Ferrari. Why does he need to get a Ferrari? Can he go with a cheap ladder? Because we imagine that the totality of the egalitarian framework tells you the first basic needs you get are those basic needs that are fundamental to your existence. The gap between existence and non-existence is the largest marginal utility gap. Every other gap is less important, and therefore in a utilitarian framework, you need to reason and think the best way would be for everyone to get their goods, and not just me, and not be selfish. Very proud to propose.
There's been a failure to distinguish between morally suboptimal acts and immoral acts. Here is the distinction. I may not do something that is perfectly utility maximizing for every human on the planet, which is true incidentally also by allowing myself even enough to subsist, because that is robbing someone by the same method that they espouse. That is different to actively creating harm for individuals or to actively stealing always. Note that Dan especially is very keen on couching this debate in like the rogue wolves of Wall Street. They are not the only people who acquire wealth, rather that is all of us when we have part-time jobs that allow us to come to this thing and do this ridiculous activity, right? It is anyone who does anything above a subsistence level that we tell you is arbitrary, that we tell you changes, and that we tell you is limiting of human progress. I'm going to talk about two things in extension. Firstly, why the UN minimum standard is a weird, arbitrary, counterproductive gauge of human morality under all Dan's metrics and all everything else. And secondly, I want to talk about why there exist alternative uses for wealth that can be morally preferable, and that's enough to win this debate because they haven't shown it's categorically bad always. Let's talk firstly then about what our criteria for an immoral act are. And the distinctions between utilitarianism and contrarianism and so forth aren't entirely relevant here because they all boil down to what is the best way that I can create good outcomes for the society that I live in that either gave me things or that I exist in with fellow humans because of a common humanity. Like, what are we going to say under this? First of all, note that it is impossible to exist platonically disengaged from the throes of world capitalism. When I go to the shop to buy a pint of milk in the morning because I need that is me giving money to the exact same immoral actors that they don't want you to buy excess goods of. They have not located a morally perfectly clean point. Moreover, they fall back always when we ask, what about other things that you can do for money? On saying, oh, it's okay to just donate all excess to improve the world in the most utilitarian, maximizable way. That is grand in principle. But in principle, we can also just say, well, we'd like a wealth inequality that exist. The fact that we're taking this debate with a context where that does exist indicates we have to engage somewhat with the real world because that's what we're trying to solve. In the real world, it is unclear what is the morally best thing to do with your money. That's why it's important that people be able to take risks. Why so? Because if I am, for example, investing in cures for malaria, it's unclear which cure will work. And in order to maintain my minimum standard of living, I need to be spending above that in order to get those, often with profit incentives on the side for me, right? That's one reason that in order to be able to show that the sorts of losses that often come with trying to save the world and failing, you need to be able to leverage yourself above that by holding on to some of that wealth. Moreover, we tell you that living in the kind of abject poverty that they tell you about, which, like, incidentally, the UN minimum standard is not by any means aspirational. It's like people in refugee camps can sometimes meet this. Like, in order to subsist in that sort of circumstance, you're often making choices that are net inefficient for the global market. Let's take an example. In order to abide by their policy, I have to rent my house instead of mortgage it, because by mortgaging it, I'm acquiring wealth for me. However, long-term, paying rent for 50 years rather than mortgaging it out is funneling wealth into someone else who mightn't use it in the good ways that I can, right? So, like, you often have to use money inefficiently when you have a very little amount of it at a time, as the UN minimum standard or whatever one they want to use dictates. All those sorts of choices result in me giving away money to people who mightn't necessarily use it to change the world in the ways that I could if I held on to it. But moreover, we tell you that they haven't shown that the acquisition of wealth is necessarily taking from anyone. The best stab they take at this is in first prop saying, well, wealth equals commodities, therefore someone else could have those commodities with their wealth. Notice that generating wealth often involves increasing the net amount of commodities by, for example, inventing mechanization that produces more of them to go around to more of us, by creating more efficient farming methods, by making more things that we can then distribute. Note that the UN minimum standard of living goes up as global wealth increases, right? The very fact that they're trying to pinpoint it right now at something that, like, would continue to rise if entrepreneurship of that sort could continue is itself indicative that their very standard is better served on our side of the house. But also, let's note note that a lot of the labour that I do is with my own body, and the counterfactual isn't necessarily like someone else being able to own me to produce things for them, right? If I decide to go out and produce something, that is me enacting labour that did not exist otherwise. I'm literally creating something rather than snatching it from the ether, right? So that's not like relevant to their taking something into consideration in that sense. Then from closing, we get the stuff about Wall Street bankers and the throes of global inequality. We're just going to answer that with our second point about alternative uses for taking those sorts of systems down, which I'll get on to after you.
Okay, so all the examples about entrepreneurship, etc., show that you have a duty to benefit as much society as possible. Don't you think therefore directly proves our metric?
Your metric is that you have an absolute duty to produce as much benefit as possible for outside society. Why are you allowing yourself a minimum standard of living? You're depriving someone else of that minimum standard of living by not seizing it. Perhaps it is the case that by engaging in labour in order to acquire your minimum standard of living, you're creating wealth that was not there previously, because you have ideas that other people don't, because you have resources or prior educational advantages that other people don't. Like, it is unclear to us why you're allowing yourself anything under your platonic metric of goodness. Let's talk secondly then about alternative uses of the money. And notice that we don't have to prove that every instance of human greed is excusable or morally good. We just have to show you that money is an instrument as opposed to like a preordained bad thing that must always be used toward badness. What are some examples of good things that you can use wealth acquisition for? One, correcting colonial inequality. Perhaps they are right in saying that they want to have like equality of outcomes. Good luck achieving that when people continue to have diverse abilities, not only because of inherent factors, but because of histories of countries plundering other countries. It is deeply unclear to us why India is immoral for trying to catch up with global economies that became so wealthy by screwing it over in the first place, and given that it can't influence those countries until it has a level of wealth on theirs. Also on a more micro level, my ability to become a politician or a barrister often involves me not producing anything for the world for years and years and years, because I'm learning things that people already know. I'm able eventually to influence the world to change things and maybe make the fairer society that they want by allowing myself an above subsistence standard of living, in the sense that I'm not producing as much as I'm consuming right then, because I'm just acquiring knowledge. So the kind of engagement that you get there only happens when people are able to postpone their economic productivity in that sense, but also because the blank utilitarian state that they want to create, whereby you can just one way do the best thing with the money, does not exist in that circumstance. And so we're happy to say that impulses like wanting to protect your national pride by building up your own economy are morally relevant. So we're very proud to oppose.
Dear judges, dear debaters, I first will respond to what closing opposition started with. Then I will make a conclusion on all of this debate and explain why proposition 1 and why especially closing opposition. Okay, well, starting with what closing opposition said. She says it's too unfair for everyone to live on the UN standard because it's like living in a refugee camp. We say we want to spread it equally around the world, and we say this is the first point. It's like we need to divide all the money from all over the world to everyone, and let's take this as a first point. If we see, oh, there's so much money over next year, everyone will get another euro, so we climb up. But the point is, we need to climb up all together equally. So maybe we live on some euros this year, and we get 2 more euros next year. If we all have this incentive to working for the whole society, happily living together, so we can earn and we climb up all together. As long as it's equal, that's the problem. So we can even spread it to India. If it's now pretty bad in India, then they will be at the same point as we are now. As the second point, she was talking about how this plan is suboptimal because because everyone is on the minimal level. That's what I was talking about. Okay, well, what are we talking about? We were talking about the 3 parts: the contractarian, the egalitarian, and the utilitarian. what was first off saying? First off was saying, okay. I'm focused. Okay, what was first off saying? First off was saying, everyone now has an incentive to working to earn money, and you can invent now already. But yeah, inventing now is a choice. I study medicine, I spoke to a doctor, he said, I want to have this amount of money because I can afford my house, otherwise I need to go to some lower house, and now I'm adapted to this part of house. So why should you invent at the moment if you've got the money for yourself? It's like only the super moral people in this society will do this at the moment. So that's what Dan was talking about. Human beings are selfish. So yeah, there is a chance you can invent now already. There is an option to, but not everyone is doing it because people are selfish. How does that work? The contractarian part is like you give something to society and society gives you something back. Okay.
Okay, but the problem is, as Nisha told you, sometimes it comes from the fruit of our own bodily labours and our autonomy. So suppose I exist in the same state as somebody else, but I have more intelligence to work harder than somebody that had the same benefit from the state. Why do I have the same responsibility since the state did not enable me working harder or being more intelligent?
Well, the intelligence you got is the luck part. That's what we also talked about earlier. So it's like that's the equality I will talk about later. But in the contractarian means you can give something to society and society gives you something back. But human beings are like selfish, so they're not always doing this. They're now giving the minimal, like the taxes. You should give the taxes, otherwise you're kicked out of the Netherlands. But if you want to give more, it's okay to give more. But why should you do it? What's the incentive for it at the moment? That's what the problem is now. Okay, now we'll move to the egalitarian part. It says everyone is equal in some way, but everyone's given other capacities. And the problem is you can use some of them, like you can use, you can use it now to be super good at math, but you can use it less if you're a super good miner, because how many miners are there in this society? And that's the thing here. It's like we're all equal at once, but the capacities you got are like pure luck. So if you've got a good one, you can climb up in this society, you can get a big house like the doctor has. But if you don't, you're like, yeah, okay, no way, not for you in this society. So that's the problem here around. Third thing we talked about is utilitarian. It's what Roel also said, namely the relative comparison. Like if you're very poor and you get €1, it's like wealth like this for you, and if you're super rich and you get €1, it's like this. If I get a car, I will be very happy because I can drive to Nijmegen instead of taking the stupid train who was always 10 minutes late and then get on a bus who will never come. So I'm very happy if I get a car. But if I got 3 more cars, yeah, well, I can drive only one, and my boyfriend will be happy, but he can't drive cars, so what's the point of 3 other cars? Yeah, so that's the relative comparison we're talking about. If you get something for the first, it's like fundamental for you, and if you get some cars later, you get some more, it's like useless. So, okay, what was this debate all about? It's like moral if you're living all together on the same standard. And why is that? You need to give something to society to get something back. You're very lucky if you got the right capacities to live in this world, and you only need the first thing you've got. I don't need to drive those 4 cars. So I'm very proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. Moving to the last speech of this final, also the last speech, Wageningen.
No, way to go.
The burden of opening government, and indeed of all the government teams in this debate, is to prove that there is something inherent about the acquisition of wealth that means that it is always immoral once you've satisfied your basic needs. On our side of the house, we have to prove that there are at least some instances in which the acquisition of wealth can be not immoral. We think that on their side of the house, they've not been able to prove this inherent. We're going to explain why actually we think there are plenty of examples why it's not inherently bad, even though they didn't prove that it was. Secondly, we're going to explain why there are many reasons why you can just have morally good reasons to acquire wealth. Specifically, the point that we're trying to make in closing is that even if it is perhaps not the morally best thing to do, that doesn't make it immoral in and of itself. We think morally suboptimal is distinct from immoral. We think that one necessitates you doing something that is not the best thing that is potentially possible. We think the other requires you actively taking steps to do something that is wrong. We think the fact that you can achieve greater moral outcomes in the long run is a trade-off that doesn't have a philosophical right or wrong answer. We're happy to accept that this might be one way in which this is totally fine for you to do something that is maybe suboptimal in the short term because it permits you to do morally good things in the long term. Before that, I have a few points of rebuttal. Firstly is this idea of the minimum standard of living, which is something that opening government kind of hung on this idea of what the UN defines as a minimum standard, and they said, oh, but it's fine, we'll accept any minimum standard. But then all of the Gov bench then conveniently decided to reframe as it being about your third Ferrari or your second car. That's not what we're talking about here, right? Because when I asked a POI about wealth inequality and how the only way you can improve wealth inequality is by allowing those people that don't have any wealth to be acquisitive, to gain that wealth in order to have social capital to exist in society, I think it is wrong for them to say that the minimum standard of living, your basic needs, allow you to exist in society. It might allow you to exist insofar as you don't die. I don't think that society is something that you can exist in without having some form of wealth and capital. We think that having more wealth and capital is perfectly legitimate under that metric anyway. And I think that given that some people are systematically denied access to that ability to participate in society, it is morally good to have that kind of reduction of equality. But then their response to this was that, well, redistribution is possible. Firstly, this presupposes that wealth acquisition has at some point already taken place. But secondly, and this applies equally to Dan's pre-buttal on political power, the presence of an alternative that might also be morally good does not make our way of achieving a morally good outcome morally bad. We think it is still morally good that somebody gains wealth, even if you could also give them that wealth through redistribution. If it means that you get a socially good outcome, we think we win on that basis. We think that, particularly, the Prime Minister decided to dismiss Nisha's case as being grounded in the best case scenario. We think that's not the issue. It's not our burden to defend the Wall Street bankers. It's our burden to say that there are many instances in which you gaining wealth for your own self, for you being selfish in that sense, is not morally bad. We think we've done that pretty conclusively, and specifically when Nisha talks about morality, I'll move on to that later. Secondly, they then say, look, an extra euro to a billionaire is useless. It seems strange. It seems strange to me to say that this means that you should therefore not allow people to have wealth up beyond their basic standard. Because if that's the logic, that your extra utility is doing less for you than it would have done previously, as I asked my point of information, I don't understand why that should be a philosophical standard, given that it's just another arbitrary number, and that your marginal utility for an extra dollar is decreasing all the time. But secondly, it's unclear why this level is the metric by which we should determine when something is immoral. I would suggest the level when something is immoral is closer to when you're a millionaire, when the functional utility of an extra dollar approaches zero, and you literally are not gaining anything from that extra dollar, but you are preventing perhaps somebody else taking that dollar. I think that that's something that people are more likely to intuitively believe is immoral, insofar as morality may perhaps be derived from some kind of socially agreed norm. That seems consistent with the fact that empirically, billionaires tend to be a lot more philanthropic once they achieve a certain wealth level than other people. The DPM even concedes in his speech that the debate might be about utility. It's unclear why more utility for me, especially when it might be a result of my own effort, completely distinct from any benefits I might have given from the state, completely distinct from any responsibility I might have towards others, which they never prove to us in government, is less morally legitimate for me to pursue. That this is something that we think continues to extend to all people, that they're allowed to be able to do things for some morally good outcomes. I don't think they necessarily prove that doesn't happen. No thank you. With regards to why there might be a responsibility towards others, which opening government never proved, Dan got a bit closer when he said that, well, society may act as some sort of enabler, which allows you to gain wealth that you owe for the rest of your life. That's an argument for maybe 100% taxation. It's not an argument for never allowing people to pursue wealth without it being morally illegitimate. Nietzsche tells us that we have bodily autonomy, and our moral claim is to have, to the fruits of our labor extends to the labor that we acquire, from our inherent ability or our intelligence. I asked this in a point of information. I said, well, the state has no responsibility to that. So why is it morally illegitimate or morally wrong for me to use that thing that the state has not given me for selfish reasons, given that it is a decision that I have taken to forego other benefits by using that time in labor instead of leisure and gain the fruit of that? The response to that was, well, this is something that's down to luck. That might be true of intelligence. I don't think it is true of effort. I think this is essentially something that boils down to that boils down to personal preferences, and this is something that people should be allowed to determine for themselves. Yes?
Even if all you say is true, please weigh it off against utility and the most fundamental rights. Even if you deserve the money, it just doesn't weigh up.
But this is the point, is that utility is something that's ultimately arbitrary. Secondly, utility is something that's occurring on both sides of the house. So yes, maybe it's not morally optimal, we think it's not necessarily immoral, which is the burden in this debate that you guys have to prove. But secondly, on this idea of, so now we've proven why it might not necessarily be moral. On this idea of why it might actually be morally good in the long term, i.e. act as an enabler for you to be wealth acquisitive in order to have other morally good outcomes. There are two responses to this. The first one that we talked about is the creation of wealth. This is something we flagged up in a POI right at the start of this debate, and that basically says that often the acquisition of wealth is the only way that we're able to produce more wealth in the long term. They talk about commodities, and they say that this is bad on a utility basis because it foregoes other people being able to get there. That is only true in the short term, insofar as that the easiest way to make money is to invest money into other sources, and to therefore create the ability for people to exact a higher standard of living for themselves. Not just for yourself, but for people you might employ, for people in wider society through the taxes you pay. We think all of that continues to exist when we allow people, without it being morally wrong, for them to pursue wealth. Secondly, we think this applies on a political level. We do exist in a world which is capitalistic. We think it's a bit kind of a case of having their cake and eating it for them to say, well actually, we'd rather we just lived in a world that wasn't capitalistic at all. We think given that we do, it is not morally wrong for you to try and operate to the best that you can in that world, and we think that if this means that you're systematically disenfranchised, or that you start in a position of weakness relative to other people because of your background, or because of the fact that those people started off with more wealth in the first instance, you trying to acquire wealth in order to be able to compete freely against them, or to acquire wealth for yourself to be able to participate in that society, is something that is still morally legitimate for you to do as well. We think that is morally legitimate on a personal level in that you're trying to make things better for yourself, to correct an injustice that might be something to correct. We think it's also morally legitimate on a social level, insofar as this is the only way that you can correct for broad-standing problems in society that are often tied monetarily. I know it's very in vogue in debating to take the leftist stance, but the problem is that ignores the reality of the matter, which is that this is the best way to improve the lives of people in the long run. Moreover, it is more philosophically consistent on our side of the house. They never were able to prove to us why this is immoral inherently, why it is always going to be immoral. That is why I beg you to vote for closing opposition.
Thank you for that. First of all, I'm really tired, so I apologize for anything I might say that might be not as I thought it normally is. But first of all, I would really like to thank you on behalf of the organization committee, Shaheen and Astrid, but also of the Board of Wageningen debating, Teun and Natanja, for the effort that you took to come here and to have that you actually took the chance of joining our first ever Wageningen Open. I hope we gave you what you expected. We didn't make all our promises. And of course, then you come back next year with more friends, though not more people sleeping over because we won't have more people red. It's pretty awesome that you have an association of 11 members, that you host about 20 people, and that you have a debating tournament with 28 teams and 7 brooms. I think that's quite an accomplishment if you only exist for 2 years. I would also like to give a really big hand to the CA team who made this tournament even greater than it would have been in potential as we thought it would be. So, Stijn, Connor, Michael, and Gigi, thank you so much. And to round it all up, I would give the floor to you, not after I've said that the tab will be online after the announcement of the best speaker directly, because we promise what we do. Thank you.
Top 10 speakers, I apologise for the pronunciation. In 10th place, joint 10th place, with 78.25 as average, we have Evelyn Svingen from Maastricht providing the Holy Trinity, and Joost Koerman from GDSA. It's only going to get worse. In 9th place, well, the speaks going from LUC A to B, oh God, Floris. In 7th place, with an average of 79, Barik. In 7th place, also with 79, Simone Martina Perez. In 6th place, creeping up with 79.25, Emma Marshall. In 4th place, joint 4th place, with 80.5, Royal Nebo. In 3rd place, with 82.75, Nish. In 2nd place, with 83.25, Nisha. And therefore, in 1st place, shock horror, with an average of 83.75, Dan Vanek.
All right. I'm gonna talk about the final. First, I want to say something to the people from Wageningen. You guys have provided for one of the absolute best competitions I've ever been to. How it was run, how the food was, how relaxed you were throughout the day. All of that for a first time ever competition. Let's give a hand for all of this. Alright, I'm not going to spend as much time on talking about the final. We had a very difficult deliberation. We did not reach a unanimous call. Eventually, on a 4-1 split, the winner of the first ever Wageningen Open is the team from closing opposition.
Thank you.
For just one day.
So for those people who want to stay here, be welcome. I also heard there's a Champions League final on the other side of the...
Over.
Yes, the good thing is that on the other side of the square there is beer. So please feel free to join us on the other side. Also feel free to stay here and do your thing. One more very important thing. Because we did everything we promised, but there are still some people that haven't paid their bills from their drinks during the dinner. So we would feel very, very, very grateful. Not even grateful, I mean, you just have to pay for your drinks. So please go downstairs and pay for them. Or come to me and say you're going to pay them to me, because that's also fine. Have a nice night and thank you again.